How many more people are we still waiting for?
Seven more.
Okay. Should we just wait? Okay. Somebody else. Should we just wait for a couple more minutes and then start? Uh,
Sure. We can maybe take a few more questions in the meantime.
hmm.
Hello, so Anirudh.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm facing a different problem where where the command line executes, I mean it initiates, but after 15 to 20 seconds it just stops reading.
The partition finder.
Yeah, and when yeah, the command prompt, it initiates.
Okay.
It stops at 15 or 17 completion,
Okay.
and then it doesn't. The new lines don't add up.
Okay.
So when I restart the app, it adds. It goes to even more, like 20 or 25%, and then it stops.
Okay.
So I don't know what's happening there. So I'm doing it bits and bits.
Have you tried washing it
And
with
after
detergent?
40-45%,
We'll figure it out.
I don't know what kind of.
Yeah, we'll try and figure that out. So I think quite a few people will have some troubleshoot issues. So maybe those things, if you can share screen, it will be much better to figure out.
Roy, which version of Python are you using?
2.7.5.
2.7, because this may be reason because we have I have 2.7.5, but anyway I had to install 3.8, so maybe that would be a problem.
Yeah,
I'm
so
not sure.
because I was facing problem in the afternoon, I had to uninstall 3.8. So I had both the versions on my computer.
I think once when we install 2.7.5, there is an option that which says you have to show it a path. You have to just click on that, and I think if we click on that, I think this will help. I don't know, but I'll try it again.
Yeah,
Yeah, Anuj, I think I tried the same thing. I tried uninstalling, but same thing occurs. Let's see.
you're getting a different kind of error, na? Something import error, I think.
Okay, let's see. Chal now.
Yeah.
Okay, should I just start? There are maybe a couple more people missing, right?
Yeah, get started. It's already 10 past.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, we are going to be dealing with maximum likelihood tree building using maximum likelihood, and we'll be dealing with bootstrapping today. But before that, I just wanted to tell you a couple of things. One, before both Chaitanya and I forget, all these slides that you see, even the ones that Chaitanya and I are presenting, these are mostly made by Praveen. So in case you want to use these slides, because you are getting PDF of these slides, please make sure you acknowledge Praveen for it. We You can modify it, but still acknowledge. The other thing is that so something that I forgot to tell yesterday is when we started off with parsimony, which is like the first tree building method that we started off, which uses a character state approach or a discrete approach. And I hope you remember why it's called a character state approach, because it just basically takes every character or every site independently. So we are actually getting into a whole different realm of tree building methods, which uses optimality criterion. So two of the tree building methods that we did not discuss, but I had briefly mentioned are least square and minimum evolution. So both these are distance-based tree building methods, but these also use optimality criterion because you're actually searching through all possible tree topologies. So parsimony, if you've realized, what we had done, the exercise that we had done yesterday was using 4 taxa. So 3 possible unrooted trees. So you're actually looking at all possible unrooted trees. And just maybe a couple of slides later, I'll show you how the number of unrooted trees and your rooted trees actually increase as and when you increase the number of taxa. Okay, somebody else is coming. Just give me a minute. Okay, and so parsimony. So can anyone tell me what is the optimality criteria that parsimony uses? What does it optimize for?
The least number of
The
changes.
minimum number of changes.
Minimum number of changes. So it's basically the optimizes for the lowest tree length or the shortest tree length. So the tree that has the shortest tree length is the most parsimonious tree. And yesterday's exercise, you would have realized that, so there were 3 trees that you worked on, and one of them can be explained using 11 changes, and there are 2 other trees that can be that explained using 13 changes. So remember that there are 2 trees that can be explained using 13 changes, similar number of changes. You can also get a scenario, with what a different kind of data set where you can have 2 equally parsimonious trees. So that is possible. So just keep that in mind. So we'll be dealing with likelihood today, which basically optimizes for the tree with the maximum likelihood. And we'll get to what all that jazz is later on. So this is what I've been saying. So you select the optimality criteria, whichever optimality criteria method that you're using. You generate all the possible trees. You whichever algorithm that the particular tree building method uses, you calculate that function and then pick the tree which has either the highest score or the lowest score. So lowest would be in terms of parsimony, which is the lowest tree length, or highest would be in terms of likelihood, which is like the highest likelihood or the maximum likelihood. And this is what I was talking about, the number of possible rooted trees and unrooted trees. So what we've been dealing with is 4 taxa, right? And you have with 4 taxa, this stands for rooted trees and this stands for unrooted trees. So with 4 taxa, you have 3 possible unrooted trees and 15 possible rooted trees. So if you increase the number of taxa, actually 10 taxa is hardly anything, right? 22 taxa is also hardly anything. Just see the amount of unrooted trees itself that you have to deal with. So the whole point of showing this is that with UPGMA and neighbor joining, I mean, in methods like UPGMA and neighbor joining, which spits you only one tree, you're getting into tree building methods which look at all possible trees, and therefore your tree building methods are getting more and more intensive. They're getting more and more computationally intensive. Okay, so I had briefly touched upon some tricks that some of these programs use. So these, they're basically called heuristic searches. So maybe you can search for it in the phylogenetic handbook that we have given you on what heuristic searches are. It should be fairly simple for you to figure it out. Okay, so we will start with the maximum likelihood. So maximum likelihood is basically your probability of the data given the hypothesis. Okay, so this will be clear in a moment, but let's just take a real life example. Let's just do a normal coin toss experiment, right? So you have a coin and you don't know whether it's fair or biased, right? So let's say the probability of it being heads, the probability of heads is P, and the probability of tails would be 1 minus P, right? So if it was fair, what would P be? Can anyone tell me? If the coin is fair.
0.5.
0.5. Perfect. Okay. So everyone is on board. So if the coin is fair, then your P would be 0.5 and your tails would be 1 minus P, which is 0.5. Okay. All right. So you don't know, you've taken a coin and you don't know whether it's fair or biased. So you take that coin and you toss it 4 times, right? You toss it 4 times and you get 1 heads and 3 tails. Now, the sequence in which these tails or heads have occurred is of no consequence to us. So let's not worry about that. But your data here is that you've got head once and you've got tail thrice, right? So what is your intuition? Is the coin fair or biased? I'm waiting for an answer. Given the data. Biased. Okay. So what value of P would give you this data? Remember that if it is fair, value of 0.5 will give you like a fair coin. But what value of P will give you this data where you have 1 head and 3 tails?
Where P for probability for tails will be 0.75 and that for heads will be 0.25.
Perfect. So basically what you have done in your head is maximum likelihood.
Other way around. Probability of.
Okay, so the head.
No. You're right. Tails is 0.75. Sorry.
Tails is 0.75. Yeah. So basically, what you've done is maximum likelihood in your head. So it's as simple as that, right? So what we do in order to what maximum likelihood does is that it actually puts in different values of P in order to find out which of these has the maximum likelihood, right? So like I mentioned earlier, your likelihood is basically the probability. This stands for probability of data given the hypothesis, right? So your P is the hypothesis, D is the data, which is so remember that we've got 1 heads and 3 tails, right? So your heads is P and tails is 1 minus P, right? So that's 1 heads and 3 tails. So that's P times 1 minus P times 1 minus P, 1 times 1 minus P, right? So what we can start doing is that we can start plotting different kinds of different data. So we can start off with a very, very low number. Let's start off with a P of 0.1, right? So if you put 0.1 here, so that will be 0.1 times 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9, right? So that will give you a likelihood of 0.072. I hope that's clear. Okay. So we say, okay, so this is a likelihood, the likelihood value is 0.072. Let me put a very high P. So we put a P value of 0.75, right? So that will be 0.75 times 0.25 times 0.25 times 0.25. And that will give you a likelihood of 0.011, right? Which is, so you realize that you have to be somewhere in middle here, right? So as soon as you put a P of 0.25, you realize you're getting a very high likelihood, and that is your maximum likelihood, right? So we're going to use the same concept for tree building as well. Now, remember that with since yesterday we have gone into this character state tree building approach, where you go directly from the sequence alignment to the phylogeny. So there's basically no loss of data. right? So likelihood, as I said, is the probability of the data given the hypothesis. So the data here is your sequence data, and the hypothesis here is the tree, right? So given the data, you might have a lot of different trees, right? And therefore you might have a lot of different hypotheses, right? But what makes likelihood much better than parsimony is that it also incorporates a model of sequence evolution, right? So in other words, you have number of different trees depending upon how many taxa you have. So let's say you have tree number 1, tree number 2, tree number 3, all the way to Tn, right? And then you have a model of sequence evolution. So you take tree number 1 and you incorporate it with the model of sequence evolution, and you try and find out whether, given this tree and given this data, given this model of sequence evolution, whether it can explain the distribution of data that you have. Okay, so then you do the same thing for the second tree, but your model of sequence evolution doesn't change. You do it for the third tree, and similarly you do it for all possible trees, and you determine the likelihood scores, and then you select this tree which has the highest likelihood score. Okay, so I hope at least till here it is clear, because one thing that I wanted to reinforce is that likelihood is the probability of the data given the hypothesis, right? So you keep changing your tree, your model of sequence evolution remains the same, and given the model of sequence evolution and the tree, you're trying to find out whether that explains the character distribution that you have, the data that you have. Okay, all right. So we will be working on the same data set that we have been working on till now to calculate the likelihood of a tree. So remember that we are still dealing with a character state approach. So we'll start with the first site, right? So let's start with a tree, our favorite tree, where human and chimp are sisters and gorilla and orang are sisters. And let's call these, let's root the tree. Okay, we'll go back to an unrooted tree in a moment, but just for simplicity's sake, let's just root the tree. And let's say that the node connecting human and chimp is X, the node connecting gorilla and orang is Y, and the root is Z, right? And instead of the taxa, you start putting in the character that you have from your data set. So for human, there is a G, for chimp, there is a C, for gorilla, there is a C, and for orang, there is an A. All right. All right. So now, how do you calculate the likelihood of a site, right? So don't worry about all these numbers here. I'll explain them. The likelihood of a site is the prior probability of that state times probability of change from here to here. So we're talking about a state, a state that this root has. And so this could be either, when I say a state, this could be either A, T, G, or C. This could be either A, T, G, or C. This could be either A, T, G, or C. And all these V1 to V6 are your branch lengths. Okay. So remember, V, if you remember from yesterday, V was mutation rates times time. Okay, so the time component is already there. So these are your, let's assume that these are your branch lengths. Okay, so we want to find out whether this is an ATG or C, whether this is an ATG or C, and whether this is an ATG or C. Okay, so likelihood of a site, let's say this site, is the prior probability times probability of change from Z to an X given V5 times probability of change from an X to a G given V1, probability of change from an X to a C given V2. So now you're finished with this side, And similarly, you do it for the other side also, right? Now remember that we don't know whether this is A, T, G, or C, right? So just like the coin toss experiment, we actually have to test it against all possible scenarios, right? Which means that we have to test it assuming that it is an A, assuming that it is a T, assuming that it is a G, or assuming that it is a C. All right. So let's try and do that now. I've already talked about this. So really don't worry about all these. It looks really daunting and intimidating. So I'll just walk you through. It'll just get clear in a moment. So let's assume that this is an A, right? So that would mean that's the prior probability that this is an A times probability of change from A to X given V5. And then, X to a G given V1, X to a C given V2. And then similarly, you go down this path. But that we've done it only for A. So you do it for T, you do it for G, and you do it for C, right? And so basically you do a summation over all possible states. All right. Now, okay, so this is done. But the problem is we don't know what this is. This could also be either A, T, G, or C, right? So we have to do all possible summations over this also. So I've gone back to a Z here because otherwise it will get too cluttered. Another thing that I wanted to remind you is that this is probability of change from Z to an X given V5. This is not multiplication. So there should have been a sign like this here, like a straight sign. But we didn't do it because it looked too cluttered otherwise. Okay, so we have gone back to an X here, and we assume that this is an A. So it's probability of this particular site given Z to an A given V5, and then A to a G given V1, A to a C given V2, and then you keep doing it for all possible. So you have to assume this as A, T, G, or C. You have to assume this is A, T, G, or C. So you can. I hope you're getting how computationally intensive it can get, right? So it's just getting more and more and more and more, and we are dealing with only 4 taxa here, right? And only with the first character. Right? Fortunately, there is a better method to actually find out the likelihood of this tree, of this tree topology, right? And this method was first talked about by Joseph Felsenstein, right? And it's called Felsenstein tree pruning algorithm, right? So what Felsenstein said is that instead of going from the root. So remember here, we are going from here to the tip, right? So Felsenstein said that instead of going from the root to the tip, let's just go from the tip to the root, right? So what we'll do is that we'll forget about this particular part of the tree and just take one small tree, one small part of the tree, or let's call it the sub tree. Right? And let's assume that this is the complete tree. Okay. So again, we put in the character state that this is in. So for a human, there is a G in the first site, and for a chimp, there is a C in the first site, right? And these are your branch lengths, which are V1 and V2. And let's say that the node connecting these two is called X. Right, so you have to find out the likelihood of this tree, right? So X can be either A, T, G, or C. All right, so this is much more simpler than what we have been doing earlier because there's only one small tree to worry about. So you have to assume all possible states here. So just bear with me for a moment. It will become clear. So so the prior probability of this site X is the summation over all the possible states. So let's assume that the prior probability is A. So it will be prior probability of A. Okay, so here's a question. So if I assume Jukes-Cantor model of sequence evolution, what is going to be the prior probability of A?
Either G or C.
No. I'm saying if I assume a Jukes-Cantor model of sequence evolution, what is the prior probability of any base? What is what is the frequency that any base has?
Same for all bases.
Same for all bases, right? So it's going to be 0.25, assuming it is Jukes-Cantor model of sequence evolution. So this, if I follow Jukes-Cantor, then this is going to be 0.25. Okay, so we'll get to that later. But let's say this is prior probability of A times probability of change from A to a G given V1 times probability of change from A to a C given V2, and then you add it with prior probability T. You assume that this is T, so T to a G given V1, T to a C given V2. Okay, so you do it for all the possible bases. Okay, now does this look familiar? Probability of change from one base to another base. Do you remember what it is called?
Transitions and transversions.
Yeah. So that is only purines to
Shruti says
purines.
Pij.
Okay, great. So someone's got it. So that you're basically going from one base to another base. So that's Pij given. So this is given time t, but what we are doing is given V1. But there is already a time component in the branch length. So we're just going to take this. And probability of no change, which means that the probability that the base remains the same, is Pii given time t. Okay, so A to an A here, so this diagonal is basically Pii. So there is no change. A to an A, there is no change. T to a T, there is no change. G to a G, there is no change. C to a C, there is no change. And all these are Pij, which is T to an A, G to an A, C to an A. Okay, so all these are Pij, whereas all these are Pii. And we can actually use this if we follow a Jukes-Cantor model. We can actually use this information. How do we do that? So let's assume, just for simplicity's sake, let's assume that all the branch lengths are 0.4. Okay, don't ask how we've got this number. We've just assumed that the branch lengths are 0.4, which means that this is 0.4, this is 0.4. Okay, so let's assume B is 0.4. All you have to do then is just plug in the value here. So there will be 1 by 4 times 1 minus e to the power minus 0.4. And then you get Pij, you get the value for Pij times T. Okay, so your Pij times T given a branch length of 0.4 is 0.08. Okay, now what is the probability of no change? Again, all you have to do is just plug in the value here, which would be minus 0.4 here, and you get a Pii of 0.75. Okay, now if you the longer the branch length, will Pij increase or Pij decrease?
Increase.
Correct. So there is more chance of more changes happening, right, with more time. So that is what is happening here. So we have assumed that the branch length here is 0.4 across all branches. So it's 0.4. So PII is 0.75 and PIJ is 0.08. But if we take a branch length of 4, you'll see it's 0.26, which is, PII. The probability that it remains the same is actually less, whereas the probability that it is something completely different is actually more, right? So it decreases along this plane and increases along this plane, as and when you increase the branch length. Okay, I hope this is clear. It will be clear in a little bit why we have taken 0.4, but we've basically assumed that it is 0.4. Okay, so now we have probability of change from one base to the other, the value of probability, and all of these are same because we are following a Jukes Cantor. Okay, so now we can actually start plugging in these values, right? So you have the prior probability that it is an A, which is 0.25, which one of you had already answered. Probability of change from A to a G, which is, if you see this, it's probability of change from one base to another different base. So it's Pij given V1, which is 0.08 times probability of change from A to a C given V2, which is also probability of change from one base to another base. So it's 0.08, right? So you get 0.01, 0.0016. Okay. Similarly, you do it for all possible states, right? And because we are assuming Jukes Cantor equilibrium base frequency, so all of these are going to be 0.25. And we are doing this because we think that this is the complete tree, right? And the likelihood of this tree would be basically the sum of all this. So you add, if you add all of this, the likelihood of this tree given a Jukes Cantor model of sequence evolution and the data and this tree becomes 0.0332, right? But remember that this is actually not our complete tree, right? So what we'll do is that we will remove the 0.25, the equilibrium based frequencies, because we can always revert back to it. So we're done with this part of the tree, right? Where we've calculated, we've just not added the prior probabilities here. We just have the probability of change from one base to another base given the branch length. And we have these values, right? Now, these are the values that you get. So probability of change from an A to a G is 0.0064, or probability of again, probability of change from a T to a G is 0.0064. So this is already telling you something. It's telling you that the probability that this is either a G or a C is much higher, right? So similarly, you do it for the other side. So remember that we have been working only on this. You work in a very similar manner on this. So here you notice that the probability that this is either an A or a C is much higher than a G or a C, right? Here also we are assuming the branch lengths are 0.4, right? So we've basically got the prior probabilities here, we've got the prior probabilities here, and now we can either take either X or Y as a root. It doesn't matter, because remember that Jukes Cantor is a reversible model, which means probability of change from an A to a G, let's say this is A, this is a G, probability of change from A to a G is same as probability of change from a G to an A, right? So it doesn't matter which one you take as the root. So let's take Y as a root, right? And what we will do, okay, I know this looks scary, but just bear with me for a moment. What we will do is just we will assume that Y is A. Let's assume that Y is stuck at A, right? So you're going from here to here. Yeah, probability of so you're going from A to if X were an A. Now, if X is an A, that would mean that it is Pij or Pii. Which one would it be?
PII.
Pii, right? So Pii, if I go back to the matrix, is 0.75, right? So this is the probability that that it is an A is 0.06 times Pii, which is 0.75, times probability that this is an A, which is 0.0064, right? So that gives you one value. Now you keep Y as an A, you stick to Y as an A, and you change this to G, right? So you're going from probability that you're going from A to a G. And now remember, you're going, since you're going from one base to a different base, it is Pij. And therefore, you will multiply it by 0.08, right? So the prior probability that this is this is A is 0.06, that remains the same, times 0.08, which is Pij, times 0.06, which is the probability that this is a G. So similarly, you do it for all possible states of X, right? Now remember, we have done for all possible states of X, assuming that Y is A. But Y can also be a G, Y can also be a T, Y can also be a C. So you basically look at all possible states, right? And what you do is you get all these values, you just add these up, right? And that will give you the likelihood of this tree of getting so that will be the likelihood given a Jukes-Cantor model of sequence evolution and this character distribution. Okay, so remember that all we have done till now is just look at character number 1. We still have 9 more characters to go. So you can imagine how computationally intensive it is. And Praveen has diligently actually calculated all of this and has provided these results. So all the sites are there. So remember that we have not included the prior probability, right? The prior probability is 0.25. So once we have the likelihood of all the sites, then you can actually multiply it by 0.25. So you can multiply the likelihood by 0.25 here, the site number 2, you multiply it by 0.25, and then you get this particular number. So your likelihood, the complete likelihood of the complete tree, given an alignment, which is the alignment that you are working with, which has 9 characters, is then the product of the likelihood of each site. So which would be a product of all of these things, which would be likelihood number 1, 2, 3, 4. So all of these, the products. And you realize that this will be an extremely small number. And most computers or calculators are not able to deal with such small numbers. So therefore, what is usually done is that these values are converted into log likelihood units. So that makes it much more convenient to then, if you once you convert it into log likelihood units, all you need to do is just add up these log likelihood units, and that will give you the likelihood of the tree. Okay, so the likelihood of the tree, remember we worked on only one tree, and there are 3 possible trees, right? So out of the 3 trees, we have worked on only one tree, and the likelihood of that tree, given a Jukes-Cantor model of sequence evolution and this character distribution, is minus 43.7. Okay, so similarly, you do it for all the other trees. By the way, so this is when you do it by hand, minus 43.7. Whereas when you feed in this data you feed in this data and you work when you ask the program to find out the likelihood, it gives you a different value. Why do you think it has given a better likelihood score? So remember, this is actually better than, so this is actually a better, larger number. So why do you think the program has managed to give a better likelihood score? What do you think it has changed? Any ideas? I can hear someone who has unmuted, but I don't hear any answers.
I think the kind of calculations which the computer is doing, it will be to a larger number of decimal places than what we'll be able to do.
No, so it's not about decimal places. So remember, the decimal places are same here. It's minus 43.70, it's minus 40.17. There is some assumption that we have made. What is that assumption?
V value?
Exactly. Perfect. So we have assumed that all of these, so we have basically assumed that all of these branch lengths, V1 equals V2 equals V5, V5 equals V3 equals V4 is 0.4, right? Whereas what the program does is it actually keeps changing these different branch lengths and then tries to find out which among these different branch lengths will give you the best likelihood score. So that is what that's why this program has actually given a better likelihood score. Okay, so I hope that is clear. So remember that we have done it only for one tree, so you can do it for the other trees also, and so you will realize that tree number 1 has the maximum likelihood. So the likelihood of tree number 1 is the highest in comparison to tree number 2 and tree number 3. But you'll also realize that there are very, very minute differences, right? Because these are log likelihood units. Okay, so are there any doubts here? So I know this can be a little intimidating, but because you'll have the video, once you go through the video again, I think it will be clear. If there are any questions or doubts, then I can clear it right now. Otherwise, I'll go ahead.
Why are we going towards log value? Just to make it computationally easier?
So we are going towards log value because most computers or calculators are not able to deal with an extremely small number. So for example, here, remember that the likelihood of the tree is the product of all these numbers, right? And that will be an extremely small number, right? And most calculators or computers will not be able to deal with such small numbers. So therefore, you convert them to natural log, and that becomes much more easier to compare.
Because when you convert it into natural log, then you can just add them up, right? When you have product of when you are multiplying two numbers, if you take the natural log of those two numbers, you can then add them up.
It's basically represent the fixed irrational number, right?
I didn't get that.
Could you explain that again? What was the question?
I mean, it's basically try to fit in the this what you called irrational number. Basically, I mean, the value scale is different, natural logarithm and the log 10 scale. That's what.
Well, they don't really have to be irrational. These are just really large decimal numbers, right?
Okay.
It doesn't really have to be an irrational number.
So the computer will have different V values while doing the analysis.
It will actually, yeah, it will actually, keep changing the V values to see which one will give you the maximum likelihood.
So V values for every branch will be same in one
No,
a particular
no. In our case, in our case, we have taken the V values same for all the branches for simplicity's sake. But when the computer does it, it actually keeps changing the branch length to see which one will give the maximum likelihood.
So basically, the program will look for the best combination of branch lengths to get to the highest likelihood.
Okay. So just to compare parsimony versus likelihood, so I think it's a no-brainer that likelihood is definitely computationally way more intensive, and also there are a few other things that parsimony likelihood has an upper hand. So parsimony actually ignores the branch lengths when evaluating trees. Although, if you remember, you can actually scale parsimony trees based on number of events per tree or number of changes per lineage, right? So that information is there. So extreme differences in branch lengths or elevated rate of molecular evolution can definitely be a problem in parsimony. Okay, and okay, so parsimony definitely does, because parsimony cannot. In fact, of all the tree building methods that we've dealt with till now and will be dealing with, parsimony is the only one in which you cannot incorporate a modular sequence evolution. In fact, even for NJ and UPGMA, you can actually incorporate a modular sequence evolution, because remember that at the end of the day, in both NJ and UPGMA, you are calculating genetic distance, right? So instead of calculating uncorrected genetic distance or observed distance, you can actually use a model-based approach to calculate the distance, right? So parsimony that way is inferior. But the only way parsimony can actually sort of take care of these things is by where you can tweak the transition and transversion ratios. I had briefly mentioned this yesterday, but remember that this is still not model based, right? So if it's model based, there are a lot of other parameters that also go in. Okay, so the main drawback, I think, of likelihood would be that it is computationally very intensive, and the fact that it is computationally intensive, plus you are looking at such a humongous number of trees. If you have a large number of taxa, it can actually, if it does an exhaustive search for say 50 taxa, it can actually take a few days for the analysis to finish. Okay, so we can take any questions before I move into Bootstrap. If you have any questions.
So what actually is the significance of doing a maximum MT analysis? So when will we do actually, to what extent we do parsimony analysis?
Okay, so the whole idea of this workshop is to actually go from the basics to try and tell you how tree building methods have evolved over time, right? So you've basically gone from very, very simple tree building methods like UPGMA and NJ, and what we're seeing is that with every tree building methods, there are more and more nuances that are being added. which obviously makes it more computationally intensive. So what most studies have moved towards now is likelihood and Bayesian. So what we would suggest is that you do likelihood or Bayesian. And mainly because it is model, because it incorporates a model of sequence evolution.
Okay.
We will discuss some of these things in some of these topics on the last day. So confine yourself to questions pertaining to likelihood.
No other questions? Nothing in the chat also?
Nothing.
No.
Wow, Crystal. Okay. We move into Bootstrap, and I'm sure most of you who have done a little bit of tree building have, I'm sure, pressed that button called Bootstrap, and it magically gives you these numbers on the tree. But let's try and understand what Bootstrap actually does. So Bootstrap is just a technique to test the stability of a particular relationship. So you can actually present a tree with a relationship, but there you ideally, especially when you're trying to publish a paper, you should ideally also present how much support there is for that particular branch or that particular relationship based on your data, right? So it's just a measure of reliability, right? And it's also a sampling technique for estimating statistical error, in which the underlying sampling distribution is either unknown or difficult to derive. So I'll get to what this is actually, but let's first take this data and these two trees into consideration, right? So based on this data, which tree do you think best explains this data? Let's call this tree number 1 and let's call this tree number 2. Remember that the relationships are different here. Species 1 and 2 are sisters here, 3 and 4 are sisters here.
Who's base is 3-2?
3-2.
3-2.
Yes, 3-2. Yeah.
Species 1 and 4. Why is it 3-2? Can anyone say why it is 3-2? Nobody? Okay, so let's just look at this data right here. Okay, this is colored differently for a reason, right? So the ones that are colored in black are conserved sites. So you remember when Chaitanya told you about these sites that have these asterisk or the star above them. So those are basically same throughout, right? So these are conserved sites, and therefore they are of no significance. So it literally doesn't matter whether you have them or not, right? So therefore you have to take all the other characters, right? Okay, now the character number 2, 4 and 6 support this tree, and character number 8 and 9 support this tree. So there are more characters that actually support this tree, right? And this information should actually be provided when you provide a particular tree. All this information should be provided. Another way of looking at why you need Bootstrap support is when you is sampling, right? So let's say you have these 4 species, right? Species 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And we know that these are all separate species, right? So you go to the field and you collect these 4 species, and you use, let's say you're using a gene, this gene 1, and you build a tree, and you get this particular relationship where species 1 and 2 are sisters, and species 3 and 4 are sisters, right? Okay. Now you go to the field again, and you collect species 1, species 2, species 3, and species 4 again. You come back and you again do the same data set. You again take the same gene and build another data set and build a tree. So do you think you'll get the same relationship? Any ideas? My question was, if you go to the field again and collect the same species 1, 2, 3, and 4 and build another data set of the same gene, whichever gene this is, will you get the same relationship?
Jigme says yes. Shruti says yes. Prashant says yes.
All right. So ideally, yes, because there might be differences within a population of a particular species, but differences between species are going to be far greater than differences within a species population, right? So ideally, you should get the same relationship, right? And this is how you would test whether or not this particular relationship exists at all, which means that you'll have to actually go to the field 100 times, collect these species 100 times, and build the trees, which also means that you might make the species locally extinct. So there's another way of actually dealing with this, which is by resampling, right? So you basically do replicates, bootstrap replicates from the original data set, and you resample with replacement. What do I mean by that? Okay. So let's say this is your original data set, right? This includes even the conserved areas, because we're not biased towards keeping a particular uh, data, right? So we have all the 9 characters here, right? And what you do is just randomly pick any of these characters. So in this case, we've randomly picked character number 3. We've put it here, we've copied it here, and then we've put it back. And then you take another character randomly. Let's say character number 6, and you put it here, copy it, and then put it back, right? So remember that we're actually putting it back. We're replacing it, because if you don't put it back, you'll end up with the same character. You will end up with the same character distribution, right? We don't want that. So we are just randomly doing it, and we're randomly picking any character and putting it here. Now that would also mean that you might get the same character again and again. For example, character number 1 has in this data set. So you do this 9 times. So remember, there are 9 characters. So you do this 9 times. And in the 9 times that you've done it randomly, character number 1 has actually come up twice, right? Is there any other character that has come up twice here? Doesn't look like it. Here, character number 7 has come up twice. Character number 9 has come up twice. Okay, so you do this. So you have this data set where you've resampled with replacement, and you build a tree, right? So this is called a pseudo replicate 1, right? So you build a tree, and then you do this exercise again, and you build another tree. You do this again, and you build another tree using whatever optimality criteria. So let's say you're doing likelihood. So the optimality criteria would be maximum likelihood. If you're doing parsimony, the optimality criteria would be lowest tree length or shortest tree length. So you do this 100 times, right? So you'll end up with 100 trees. And what is going to happen is that if you do it enough times, the characters that support, if there are more characters that support a particular relationship are present more in number, then that will keep coming again and again. I hope you all agree with me, right? So if you do it less number of times, just randomly, you might get character number 8 and 9 a lot. But if you keep doing it multiple times, if you're doing it 100 times, there is all the more possibility that you might get the characters that support the right tree most of the time. And this is what you get here. So you, at the end, you build a consensus of all the 100 trees. And there you see that species number 1 and 2 are supported in 60% of all these trees. And it actually makes sense, right? Because if you just forget character number 1, character number 3, 5, and 7, there are 3 characters that support this tree, whereas there are 2 characters that support this tree. So that's 60% of the data that supports this relationship, right? There's 60% of the data that supports this relationship. In other words, what your bootstrapping is doing is it's trying to find out how many times this particular relationship comes up, where species 1 and 2 are sister to each other. How many times does this relationship come up, right? And then it gives you a particular value for that branch or support for that relationship. So that's all there is about Bootstrap.
Roy?
Yeah.
So this basically means if you have run 100 trees, out of that 100 trees, 60 trees came up with saying that species 1 is sister to species 2, right?
Yeah. 60% of the trees. Yeah.
Because it's 100, we are dealing with number 100 trees, so there will be 60 trees. So whatever bootstrap value we see, like if we put bootstrap value to 1000, and it says like 70, that means 700 trees were generated with that relationship, right?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, 700 times that relationship was retrieved would be the more better way to put it.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So I don't think I'm really going to talk about. Somebody had a question.
Yeah. This is Shubham here.
Yeah.
So while doing all this bootstrapping, does the proportion of that particular site or the particular amino acid, does that matter? Because if A comes 4 times, so does that matter? Because, for example, if we have the first site and second site both are identical, does this make any difference afterwards?
So which is precisely the reason why you're doing it multiple times, right? So if you do it, say 5 times, there is all the more chance that you might get just randomly, you might end up getting only a few of the characters more often, just randomly. But if you do it enough number of times, then you might get a good distribution of characters. And in that distribution of characters, it is more likely that the data that actually supports the right relationship will come up more often. So that's the whole idea. But here we're not talking, we're really not bothered about the amino acid or the codon position and all that, because it's just basically forgetting all of that and taking each character as a discrete unit. Right? So it's basically taking all these characters, character number 1 to 9, all separately.
Okay. And here, while doing this bootstrapping, do we have a point where it comes to saturation after repeating itself?
So yeah, but that is very difficult to say, right? When it will reach saturation. But what So it completely depends on the size of your data set, how much bootstrapping you should do. But most papers, most journals, they would prefer that you do at least 1,000 pseudo replicates. So each of these is a pseudo replicate. So here we have shown that you do it 400 times, but ideally you should do it 1,000 times, and then it's there's no real cutoff, but the idea is to do it enough times so that the characters that support the right tree come up more often.
Yeah, so basically, as Roy pointed out, larger the data set, more the number of bootstrap you'll have to do. For something as small as 9 characters, 100 is more than sufficient.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not really going to talk about this because Praveen, you're going to talk about this, right? The bootstrap, ideal bootstrap, and all.
Yeah, sure. In frequently asked questions, but we can just quickly say that one would like to get high bootstrap support, and if you have low bootstrap support, maybe you have to add more data. But yeah, you're right. I think we'll revisit this during frequently asked questions.
Yeah, because low bootstrap support could mean a number of different things.
It
could mean
absolutely.
Incorrect taxonomy or bunch of other stuff. So let's not complicate matters. Okay, so are there any questions?
One thing I wanted to add is that so the bootstrap value for the branch basically tells you how confident the algorithm is of the monophily of the species that eventually distend from it, right? That's all it tells you. Roy, can you go back to that tree picture? Where the previous slide, yeah, thank you. So this is a very simplistic tree where let's assume that there is a node from which species 1 and species 2 emanate. However, you could have nodes where there are 5 or 6 diversification events that happen from that later on during that lineage, right? So the branch leading to that node, let's say it has a bootstrap value of 100, it basically says that those 5 or 6 taxa that eventually distend from that node are monophyletic. That's all it tells you. That is something that has to be kept in mind while interpreting bootstrap values. Yeah, you can go on.
Roy?
Yeah.
I have this question, like there are 2 parts to it. Firstly, for example, I have taken my species of interest. I wanted to see it in the tree and the relation that may be the new species that I am describing. So I see it fit with its sister taxas with a high bootstrap value. But I added some more distant taxa to the tree to see the whole relationship with not only within the genus but outside the genus as well. And I see the area of interest has high bootstrap value, like 100 and whatever, like high bootstrap value. But as we go to other genus which are not very of great interest to me, but still they are in the tree, and I see there are the bootstrap values have gone down to 30% or something like that. So ideally, does it mean that the relation that I have established of my species of interest, does it have any impact on my species of interest when the bootstrap value of outsiders are less or something like that?
Okay, so if you're, this is something that a lot of us really have this issue. But see, if your whole point is to show a sister relationship with some other already described taxa, and if it shows a very high bootstrap support, then and that is your point of interest, then that's the end of the story. There are the other nodes which are not your point of interest. Might have low bootstrap support, if you add more data, there can be a number of different reasons for it, and I think Praveen will touch upon those on the last day.
Okay, great. And just last thing, there is something like for many a time there is something known as ultra fast bootstrap. Roy, you heard about it? Ultra fast bootstrap?
Yeah, so there is something called as rapid bootstrap in RaxML also, which
that is thorough bootstrap and then rapid. That most of the time we do that rapid bootstrap 1,000 times or whatever. But then there is nowadays there are giving on online versions they are giving, and many papers have already accepted that tree, online building tree, and interestingly it just takes 3 to 4 seconds, so the tree is done. So you have to do it in some server. So they say it's ultra fast bootstrap, and almost they gave the same result. So any idea about that?
I have no idea what these actually do, but do remember that for every data pseudo replicate that you are making, you are actually making a tree, right? So for example, if you want to test a particular relationship, and you have your likelihood tree, right? Obviously, you know that to make that likelihood tree, it is computationally very intensive. On top of that, you're making these data sets, these pseudo replicates, and for every data set, you're doing a likelihood tree, right? Now, the fact that it is going to get so computationally intensive, a lot of these programs do very small tricks in order to try and reduce the search. So instead of looking at all possible tree topologies, they look at only a few tree topologies.
Okay.
Right. So I think that is how you can differentiate between a thorough bootstrap, where you would look at all possible tree topologies, versus a rapid or an ultra fast or a super ultra fast bootstrap.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Roy, again, me.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I have another question. Like ultimately, our main goal is to get the algorithm done, which is known as maximum likelihood. Now, my question is, when it was hard for me when Mega was not GUI, and it was really at point of time. But RaxML. Mega also has this maximum likelihood option. So why do we are too much biased with RaxML, and why don't we do the same thing in Mega?
Actually, I can pretty much repeat the answer that I gave you in the last question.
Okay,
because,
got it. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah, so many of these programs actually, or software packages actually try and do these small tricks.
True.
So RaxML also does it, but it is a little more robust than Mega. So before RaxML, we used to use a program called POP, that stands for parsimony analysis, phylogenetic analysis using parsimony. And there you had the option of doing an exhaustive search or a heuristic search. So an exhaustive search would mean that you look at all possible tree topologies. Heuristic search would mean that you're not looking at some of the tree topologies because you think because they either have a value which is beyond a certain number which you think is not possible, or there could be some other reason why some trees are discarded from the search.
And if I can add, so people have often asked this question: is Mega better than RaxML? Definitely, Mega is easier to use. And what we have found, at least I have found, in some cases, Mega and RaxML give different trees, slightly different topologies. So the question is, which one is giving the right tree? There is a difference in how you can incorporate models in Mega and in in RaxML. RaxML, you can specify, you can partition the data set. In Mega, you can't. Right. So I would argue that XML is probably better for that reason.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, sir. Sir, could you please comment on PyML? Is PyML equally good as RaxML?
So there are actually a PyML, RaxML. There are some other programs called Garly. So, I mean, at the end of the day, they all do the same thing. But what we are recommending is that you do not use Mega for your analysis. I think PyML, RaxML, Garly, all these things are pretty much similar. So you can go ahead and use them. Garly is I think slightly better because you can potentially give different models of sequence evolution, but then that's also available in RaxML now. So yeah, so I mean my short answer is, there's no problem in using PyML. There are like a lot of programs that do the same thing. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah, actually, it'll be good if you can kind of play around with all these different programs and form your own opinion based on how these programs have been used by others and things like that. Of course, like Praveen said, Mega is a no-no for tree building because you can't assign specific models to specific partitions in Mega, right? But with RaxML, you can do that. And so it'll be great if you guys can figure out, what's special about PyML and Garly, and maybe tell us too, and we'll also learn that way. So.
yeah, and if you're comfortable with many of these different programs that basically do the same thing, or we assume do the same thing, then why don't you just use the same data set, use the same set of parameters, and try and run that same data set in multiple programs and see if you're getting the same result or not. That will be a cool exercise to do, right? Also, you need to be extremely jobless to do it.
Yeah, there's a project for you guys.
Okay, are there any other questions? Still clear. Okay, so then we can actually move to the practicals. So I'm just wondering, RaxML, should we just, because we have time, it's 8:30, should we just, should all of us just do this hands-on?
Sure, because I think it's just it's not very complicated to run.
It's not very complicated, and we're just going to do like a rapid bootstrap, ML plus rapid bootstrap.
Yeah, cool. And maybe at the end of it, we can ask a few of them to share their screen and show the results.
Okay, all right. So, okay, all right. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen so that all of you know what I am up to, instead of doing a running commentary on which folder I'm getting in, what am I doing, and all that. And also my RaxML had crashed just before we started the session, so I just hope everything is okay. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So before I start with RaxML, there's something. So let me just get that out of the way first. Someone was asking about interleaved versus what is that? Sequential. So yeah. So let me just quickly show that. So I'm just going to show it in Alter. So let's. I can show it in the primate data itself. Seems like around this time the server is always down with Alter. Okay. Yeah. Don't convert your files at 8:30 at night. That's the moral of the story. So much for that. So we will get into RaxML. So inside RaxML, in the practicals, there's a folder called RaxML GUI folder. Let's all open that. There is a folder called RaxML GUI 1.3. Open that. And you'll see two icons here. RaxML GUI Python file, and there is a compiled Python. So open the Python file. Just double click on the Python file. Okay, and I hope everyone is able to get this window at least. Then next, what we will do, I'll tell you about the different the options here, at least some of the options. Also, if you go to help here and go to help RaxML or help RaxML GUI, it'll take you, it'll basically open a PDF, a manual for the RaxML GUI, which is quite easy to understand and self-explanatory. So I would urge all of you to actually go through that to understand what the different options are, because you can actually do a lot of stuff. So what we'll do is click on this button called load alignment. Okay, and if you've got this, what we have to load is in the previous folder, which is the RaxML GUI folder. There is a file called primate_sitb. So let's open that. So remember that RaxML uses a filelib file format, and we've basically converted the primate data that we were working on, and we've converted that into a filelib file format. So we're going to open that. Okay, so I can actually show. So this is what an interleaved data looks like, right? So
Anirudh, sorry to stop you.
Yeah.
Since I'm on a Mac, it didn't open up when you told me to click that. So can I also open up XML separately and then do this?
Can you also open what separately? Sorry, I didn't get that.
RxML separately and then do it?
So I did open RaxML separately. So if you just click on, so you have the GUI version even in Mac, right?
Yeah, I have the GUI.
Okay, so if you open the GUI version, does it give you an option of adding alignment?
Load alignment, yes.
Okay, fine. So that's what you need. So you just load alignment, and then navigate to the folder where that primate_sitb.phy is, and load that file. Okay, so this also gives you information on your data set. So it says 11 taxa. Total number of sites are 1,140. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so there are 50. So this is what an interleaved output looks like. So you have 50 base pairs here, right? remember that in total there are 1140 characters. So you have 50 characters here, and in the next line you're continuing with the same taxa, which is gorilla. So your first line is again going to be gorilla, and then again the third paragraph, the first line is going to be gorilla. Fourth paragraph, the first line is going to be gorilla. So it will continue on until you reach 1140 characters, as opposed to sequential, which would mean that all the characters would be in one line. Okay, so it's just a way of arrangement of the data. It does not affect the analysis at all. So you can choose to do either. It doesn't matter. Okay, so now that you've loaded the alignment, what we're going to do next is try and set the partitions. Okay, so we're going to go into analysis, and there is an option called set/edit partitions. So let's click on that. I am going to make some imaginary partitions here just to show that we can actually partition it in various different ways. So what I'll do is I'll name these partitions. I can name it anything I want. Okay, so let's say I have 3 different regions, totally amounting to 1140 characters, and out of that, site number 1 to 500 is a non-protein coding region. Let's say it is 12s. Okay, so let's say my first 500 base pairs is 12s. So I'm just going to write my partition name as 12s, and it is from it by default. It already starts from 1, and from 2 I'll give 500. Okay, and here it says model. By default, it will have the option no codon. So below on the left, you'll have this option called add. So all you do is just click on that, and it will add. So it just says DNA. It recognizes it as DNA. The partition name is 12s, and the characters are from site number 1 to site number 500. Okay, and if you look,
sorry, Aniruddha, I didn't get the add option.
You don't have the add option?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So sometimes that there is a bug. I don't know what it is because of. Sometimes it's because of the operating system, or it could be something completely different. So maybe what you can do is just follow what is happening on the screen, and hopefully magically when you open the RACXML next time, the add option is going to show up. I have actually no idea why this happens though.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so just remember that I said I have 3 different regions that I'm working with, and my second region is from 500 to I don't know, 1000. Let's say 900. 501 to 900. And that is a gene. So it's codes for a protein. And what I'll do is in that option called model, I click on that, and there is a option called codon specific. Oh wait, so I didn't name this. So let's name this site B. And it is from 501 to 900, and it is codon specific. Right? I've selected that, and I click on add. So what it's done is it's taken each position separately. Okay, and then it's already ready for the third partition, for the next partition. And for my next partition, I say it is a gene called that's also a protein coding gene. Let's say it is PRLR, and it is from 901 to what is the maximum character? It's 1140. So it's 1140. and that's also codon specific. I keep it as codon specific, and then I click on add. Okay, so RACSML detects that all we've basically finished up all the characters that were available, which is 1140 sites, and it says all characters have been assigned to partitions. Set partitions for the analysis. You click on OK. If it gives you an option saying use per partition branch length, click on no. Okay, so now you're pretty much all set to start the analysis. Okay, so there are a bunch of things just that I wanted to show you before we start the analysis. On the lower right, you'll have this option called n-threads. So that basically that might differ from computer to computer. For me, it is showing 8, but for some other computers, it might show different. So that just detects the processor speed, and based on that, you can, if you want to fasten it up or use more processor speed, you can actually change this. So by default, it is 2. Okay. There are a bunch of options here. So by default, it is ML plus rapid. Give you a maximum likelihood, like one likelihood tree with the highest likelihood, one tree with the highest likelihood, and it will also do a bootstrap. And this is what Jaditya was also asking earlier. What it does is a rapid bootstrap. So it does some kind of trick to try and speed up the analysis. There is also a fast tree search, which builds you an ML tree, but using some heuristic method, so some quick and dirty method. So ideally for publication, you should not be using fast tree search. So an ML search would be the option that you should ideally choose, or an ML plus bootstrap. But the best option that you can choose is ML plus thorough bootstrap. It might take more time, but if you want to publish your data, you should ideally choose ML plus thorough bootstrap. Okay, there are a bunch of other options that you would rarely use as a bootstrap, as consensus, ancestral state, pairwise distances, which you can also do in Mega. So I'm not going to talk about that. I am just going to choose the default, which is ML plus rapid bootstrap. I'm just going to click outside. If you want, you can actually specify the outgroup from your data set. So just remember that in the data set that you've just fed, your outgroups should be Loris and Lemur, right? So if you want, you can actually specify it.
Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know that we generally select this outgroup, and like in some software there is no way of assigning the outgroup as in RACSML you have. So the basic idea or the basic reason of selecting outgroup, at the end you have to just root with it, right? So once you select outgroup, the tree which will be formed will come already rooted to that outgroup, right?
Right. So I was just getting to that. Okay. So what happens in many of these programs, so with RACSML, for example, it is going to assume that the first taxa in my alignment is the outgroup, or it is going to assume, or there are other programs that assume that the last taxa in the alignment is the outgroup, which may or may not be correct, right? But we will not choose an outgroup right here because we can actually root the tree later on. Okay, so let's not keep anything here, but if you want, you can actually put outgroup. Okay, so this is the number of replicates, the bootstrap replicates that you want to do. So by default, it is set to 100. So let's keep it to 100. But remember that if you want to publish, you should ideally do 1,000 to 10,000. It really depends on your data set. Okay, so we're going to do 100. There are these other
Roy.
Yeah.
Any idea about this? I know this till 1,000 and 10,000. After that, what does those say? MR and all.
So there are other options, especially if you're dealing with extremely large data sets. So I actually don't know what these different options are, but like for example, even this one, BS BRL. There's also if there are some versions of RACSML also have something called SH like values. So SH, okay, let's not get into that. So let's just stick to Bootstrap, which is what we understand, and that is what is important, because when you present a relationship of phylogenetic tree, you have to provide how much support there is for a relationship that you're interested in. Okay, and these are the models, and really there are only GTR and its variants, right? So you can either choose a GTR gamma or a GTR gamma I. So I stands for invariant sites. So these are largely for really large data sets. So GTR cat and GTR cat I are for really large data sets. So let's not use that. Let's just for now, just for practice, let's just use GTR gamma. Right? Another thing that I wanted to mention is that what we used to use earlier for likelihood analysis is we used to use this program called POP for likelihood analysis, and you always start with a random tree, right? When I say a random tree, so let's say there are how many of our taxa here? There are 11 taxa here, and it will start with a random tree topology, which may or may not be right. Right, and then it will start changing the branches. It will start changing the relationships, and if the likelihood score goes up from that random tree, it will keep that tree. Otherwise, it will discard it. So it will only keep a tree if the likelihood score goes up. Right now, with RACSML, one thing that it does is that it starts off with a parsimony tree, right, instead of a random tree. The whole idea being that if you start off with a parsimony tree, it is very likely that your starting tree by itself will have a high likelihood score, right, instead of a random tree. So that definitely will help in. That's one of the reasons why RACSML is preferred, because it speeds up your analysis. So instead of looking at all the tree space, you're already starting at a particular tree space from where your likelihood can go up. Okay, so we are all set for the analysis. We have selected ML plus rapid bootstrap, 100 replicates, GTR gamma, and we click on run RACSML. The first thing it will do is do these bootstrap replicates till 100.
Sir, one doubt. Sir, the partition values that we have got from the partition finder, where will we put that values in the set parameters?
I'll show you.
Okay.
Okay, that was quick. Okay, so remember that all the files that RACSML produces will be right next to wherever your filelib file was. Okay, so RACSML, after the analysis is done with whatever settings we've given, RACSML produces a number of different trees, a number of different files. So I'll just go through three of these files because those are the more important ones. So there's one file that it will create called RAXML best tree. And surprise, surprise, it is your best tree. It is the tree with the highest likelihood. There's one other file called RAXML bipartitions, which is, so this is where RAXML becomes really cool because it takes your best tree, which is a tree with the highest likelihood, and it incorporates the support values for the relationships that are there in your best tree, right? This wasn't the case in in some of the other programs which do likelihood analysis, where the bootstrapping is a completely different analysis altogether, and you'll actually have to manually incorporate bootstrap values. So RAXML actually incorporates these bootstrap values on the branches, and these bipartition branch labels are basically all your bootstrap trees. So it'll have 100 trees. Okay, and I hope you understand now why it has 100 trees. So it's basically made 100 different iterations, random iterations of your data set. Your data set is 1140 characters long. So every tree that it's made is 1140 characters long, but with sampling with replacement. Okay, so if you want to open this tree, you can do one thing. So you can right click on the RAXML best tree, which is saved as a TRE file, right? There's an option called open with. Click on that. Click on choose another app. Okay, so you will get an option called look for another app on this PC, and go to your practicals folder. Go to FigTree version 1.4.2. There is a file called FigTree version 1.4.2. Click that and click on open. So this is how you can visualize your tree using FigTree. Okay, so there are this program is actually really cool. You can do a lot of different things. If you can see on your left, there is an option called tip labels. There is a drop-down list right next to tip labels. You can increase the font size. Right now, remember that it has actually what it has done is actually it's used Gorilla as the outgroup, which is wrong, right? And what I want to do is choose the branch leading to Loris and Lemur, root the tree using the branch leading to Loris and Lemur.
Roy, could you make the branches a little thicker too?
Sure. So there is an option called appearance on the left. And if you click on the drop-down list, there is something called line weight. So in line weight, you can actually increase it. Okay. Now, what I'll do is I'll click on this particular branch that leads to Loris and Lemur. And then when I click on it, it will get highlighted. Right. And if you see it highlighted, you immediately take your cursor to this option on the top left, just below the help section called reroute. And we will click on that. This is your rooted tree, which is rooted correctly using Loris and Lemur. Okay, so this is your maximum likelihood tree. All right, but we want to see the support for these relationships also. Okay, how do we do that? So let's minimize this and open this file called RAXML bipartitions primate SIDB. So you do the same thing. You can open it using Figtree, and when you try to open it, it will give you an option. It detects that there are some labels associated with the node or branches of the tree, right? And it asks you what do you want to call them. Well, you can call them whatever you want. By default, it calls it label. You can call it bootstrap. It really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to rename it bootstrap, and I click on OK. All right. I will maximize the window. I'll do the same exercise again. I will go to tip labels. I will increase the font. You can also use different fonts if you want. You can use Calibri or whatever, any font style that you prefer. I'll go to appearance and I'll fix the line weight. All right. Now I want to see the bootstrap support for the, okay, wait. So I have to also root the tree. So I select the branch leading to Loris and Lemur. Once it's highlighted, I go to reroute. Okay. All right. So this is the maximum likelihood tree, which is rooted correctly. And I want to see the support for these relationships. And in order to see the support for these relationships, there is an option on the left called node labels. Okay. I click on node labels. There'll be a tick mark, and I go down to the drop down list. Right. And there's an option called display. So display, there will be a drop down list. If you go down to the drop down list, there's an option called bootstrap, or whatever you've named that option that came up before you opened the tree on Figtree. So I choose that option, and I can increase the font size. Okay, so this is my tree with the maximum likelihood, which is rooted properly using Loris and Lemur, and these numbers represent support for these relationships. So basically, if it says 100, that means 100 times this particular relationship was retrieved. If it says 85, it says that means 85 times this particular relationship was retrieved. If any of you have any doubts, please let me know.
Roy, I'd like to butt in here.
Yeah.
So because bootstrap values give you support for the branches, I would actually go to branch support instead of node support and put the labels on the branches. So if you can click on branch labels.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, just expand that thing, and you'll get the same label.
Bootstrap.
Yeah, just increase the size. So this actually represents the true meaning of the bootstrap values, right? And like Roy said, if you look at this branch that leads to the group Hylobates, Pongo, Gorilla, Pan, and Homo, you have a branch support of 85 or a bootstrap support of 85. So what it really means is 85 times out of 100, this group Hylobates, Pongo, Gorilla, Pan, and Homo were recovered as monophyletic. Okay, 15 times out of 100, these 5 taxa were not monophyletic, right? And that is what that is how this value of 85 should be interpreted. Yeah, cool.
Okay, I am going to minimize this window. I'm just going to show one last thing before I stop the presentation, which is how to actually incorporate your partition finder results in RackSML. So let me start by, let me clear this up first and load alignment. All right. So I actually haven't run the primate data set, but just for an example, I can show you how to actually incorporate the result that we got yesterday. We can just try and put that. So that is inside my analysis folder, best scheme. Okay, so this is what comes up as the RACXML style partition, right? So I'm just going to copy this part. Okay, I'm just going to copy this. I'll go into RACXML, analysis, set edit partitions. There's an option, there's a button called options, right? And there's an option called edit partitions, which if I click on that, you said you can now manually edit the partition settings. RACXML will use the exact text you enter in the field. So I'm happy and I say okay. And now it has a cursor. All I can do is just copy, I can just paste it. Okay. And then if I set it, then it'll just run it. But I'm not going to set it because remember my data set has 1140 characters. This has 2208. So I'm not going to do that because there might be an error. Okay, so is there anything else that we have to discuss? Any questions? Everyone, I'm sure everyone is still trying out RACXML.
Roy,
yeah.
If you can skip this question if you are dealing with it on the last day, the frequently asked questions section. But my question is, if we have time now, that what are the thumb rules that you use to improve, like point-wise, if you can say, like to improve your bootstrap support, like in certain cases if you're not getting like the desired bootstrap value, so what are the things that you look into?
Yeah, I guess we can discuss this on the last day.
Okay.
But I would urge all of you, so when we say we'll discuss in the last day, you might forget the question. So please note it down. Just note down those questions, and because on last day we will actually be talking about a lot of these issues, so it will be more relevant there. But please note down these questions. These are very important questions.
Great. Okay.
So any questions regarding likelihood?
Okay, we are open for attack.
So are people actually trying RACXML now? Roy, are they supposed to run RACXML now? Okay.
Yeah. There is so yes, and there is very enthusiastic yes also. Like yes in capital letters.
I don't see any activity.
No, in the chat. In the chat.
Yeah, in the chat also I don't see anything. Oh, maybe there is.
It is. Just scroll down.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
Ran into an error. Might have done something wrong. Okay, so some of you might have some sort of error. It ran well. Okay. Usain Bolt will be proud of it. I have error. Okay. So yeah, some of you might have some error or something like that. All these programs are damn annoying because none of them work well when you want them to. So you can try and troubleshoot it because it's actually very easy and intuitive to use. most often the problem would be your Python. So, once that is figured out, then it should be pretty much easy. After running, RackSML does not show the files. So it takes a little bit of time for RackSML analysis to finish, but your files will be wherever your filelib file was. If it doesn't show the files there, then the RackSML analysis is not over. No warning, it just did not appear. Yeah, some people actually had that issue. I really am. I don't know why that is happening. I think it has got to do with Python. So maybe try a different version of Python and see if it works. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.